This is Joe Wong. Welcome to the Trap Set. During the age of social distancing, we're recording remotely and releasing new episodes every day. Today's guest is John Congleton. John first became known to me as the singer and guitarist for the pAper ChAse, a band that formed in Dallas in 1998. Concurrent to his tenure with the band, John distinguished himself as one of the most innovative producers working today. He's made records with dozens of artists, including Sharon Van Etten, Angel Olsen, Blondie, and St. Vincent, for which he won a Grammy. John spoke to me from his home in Los Angeles. Hi, John.
Hey, what's up, dude?
Do you have the Rona?
No, I'm good. I'm sans Rona.
How are your days different now than they were pre-pandemic?
Well, weird thing was most of March was mixing records. It was mixing a couple records that I had tracked and a couple outside projects. So I was sort of good for all of March, just kind of, I had tons of work, and just only in the last few days have I really started to feel the, what everyone else is feeling, like with the lockdown kind of thing. I was supposed to be in New York right now and was going to be in New York for like a month. So yeah, definitely, it upended things for me. Just trying to take it one day at a time and help my friends out who are, frankly, way more affected by this than me.
Yeah, I think about all of my friends that work in food service or at bars or play in bands and make most of their living off of touring. And
Right.
It's really hard for lots of people right now. And I feel lucky that I already kind of work from home.
Right. Yeah, I mean, my work has certainly stopped. There's no doubt about it. But, I'm just lucky. I don't have kids. I don't, I don't really live extravagantly, never have. I could go for a long time without working and really be fine, other than the fact that I like working. But, these last few days where I've officially had not much actually that I had to do have been pretty delightful. I've spent half the day writing and half the day relaxing, and it's been great. Obviously I know that the world is falling down around me, but I'm enjoying having a little quiet time.
Yeah, there's only so much control that any of us have over stopping an outbreak. So it's kind of like if you can find some sort of joyful activities to do while you're at home,
right.
Why not,
Well, one of the things I'm trying to do is, one of the big things for me is I just always feel like I need to be making something or be productive, and that's okay. But one of the things we should remind ourselves is staying at home is a productive thing right now. It's a destructive thing if we're all going outside, I was just reading today how they're finding out more and more how, there's so many asymptomatic carriers, and that's like what's really driving the pandemic. And that is terrifying that you or I could have it and just feel fine and be infecting people. That's really a ghoulish prospect to think about.
Yeah, I guess it's better than everybody being symptomatic and dying in some ways.
Oh, 100%. Look, as I've said before to many of my friends, this is a terrible thing. But as always, I always say it always could be worse. It could be Ebola. It could be a virus that turns our insides to liquid shit. It could be worse. It could be worse.
So what have you been writing?
Well, I mean, I'm writing with a bunch of artists that some of which I've made records with before, and some people I haven't worked with before, but we've just been looking for an opportunity to write. And I've also just been writing for me too, and that's been great. I haven't really done that in a while, and I always forget how much I love to just write.
Right. Yeah. Just the feeling of doing it. The act of doing it. I
mean, just the act of writing for no good reason, just because you're a human and because you feel and because you're an artist. And I always have to be making something, otherwise I get very dark and depressed. So, my life is going to continue to be the same. It's still going to be about art, and I'm going to use my energy whenever I'm not doing that to hopefully making the situation slightly better for other people, donating money and doing what I can.
We met about 23 years ago, I think, at Rubber Gloves in Denton, Texas.
Right. Okay.
And
I couldn't remember if we met there or if we met at a mutual friend of our, Chris Yeoman's house. I don't know when it was.
We might have met at Chris's house before the show, but I remember the first time I remember hanging out was at a place called Rubber Gloves, which was...
And we played together, right?
We played a show together. My band at the time was called Acarso, and you were doing the Paper ChAse. And I remember you had 2 microphones on stage,
right,
which was cool. 2 vocal mics.
Yeah.
And your drummer was rocking a wife beater shirt and had kind of like a spike. So did you grew up in Texas?
Yeah, man. I was born in Lubbock, moved to Dallas when I was quite young, and grew up in Dallas.
What were your parents up to when you were growing up?
They were very normal when I was growing up. The only thing sort of interesting in terms of me being an artist or a musician in that was my father was a musician and was really involved in the Texas psychedelic music scene before I was born. And he
really?
He played in a bunch of great bands and was friends with 13th Floor Elevators, and that was like his crew. And so there was he continued his love of music after I was born, and then after my parents got divorced, when I was 8, he started playing again. So then music, like live music, was at the house. His band would be rehearsing, and but even before then, he was always playing great music. He had great taste, has great taste in music. So I kind of got a good jump on it. Like he liked good rock music. Like he liked stuff that I still like now. And even though he didn't care for like a lot of punk stuff, he did in a way he really liked a lot of the prototypical punk stuff like Kinks and stuff like that.
You said that your parents were both very normal. What does that mean?
Normal in the fact that they were, they had pretty straight jobs. My mom was a teacher. My father was a job that doesn't even exist anymore because it's been computerized, but he was what was called a food broker. He basically would just sell different types. His clients would be like Green Giant or something like that. And when they would come out with a new line of green beans, however you can redo green beans, it would be his job to go to like all the affiliates and say, you got to carry these green beans. They're just amazing. So he's like a salesman. And
then the band was more of a hobby for him by the time you came around? Or by the time they got divorced?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was sort of like, a midlife crisis, perhaps. Like he was probably about 40. He was around 40 when my parents got divorced. Yeah, about 40. And just found himself with time on his hands because I wasn't there anymore. And my sisters were almost like out of the house at that point.
So you were the youngest kid?
I was the youngest kid, and I was the only kid of them because both of my parents were married beforehand. So he basically just had time on his hands, simple as that. And I think that he was, just like anything else, like music can serve to be like a social stimulant. He was in a band. They were playing clubs and whatnot. So, it was a social lubricant of him to, go out and meet people, I'm sure, and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that's music. That might be one of the primary functions of music is like social. But would you go to the gigs?
I did go to the gigs. Yeah. I mean, when it would happen on the weekend or when it was like, appropriate. I was quite young.
And you were mostly living with your mom at the time?
Yeah.
And she was a teacher? What did she teach?
Yeah. She taught 4th and 5th grade, so she taught kind of all subjects,
Mm-hmm. That's not a bad age, I guess, like 9 and 10-year-olds, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, 11.
She was very serious about being a teacher. She put a lot of effort into it, and it did eventually burn her out.
So what did you draw from? So she was putting a lot of energy into. Was it a public school?
Yeah.
And Texas is interesting because at that time they were, I think, the largest consumer of textbooks. So they kind of set the tone for textbooks nationwide.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know about that. It's not just that, but it's also most textbooks are made in Texas for some reason. I don't know why that is, but yeah, a large amount of them are, and that's why you get these weird issues of like textbooks being strangely conservative, because Texas has got a lot of creepy conservative values happening there.
Was it that kind of thing that your mom got burnt out on, or was it just that it's you're not getting the respect that's commensurate with the value of such an important career?
I think it's a little bit of that, but what it really boils down to is lack of resources. They really don't give teachers what they need to do a good job, and the class sizes were huge even then. I assume it's only worse now. And teachers don't get paid well. They really don't.
I know, especially given the value and the responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, they should be... I mean, obviously, it's easy for me to say this, but teachers should be paid like doctors, in my opinion. It's such an important job.
Were you a good student?
No, first of all, I was undiagnosed dyslexic.
Okay.
So there were warning signs. I was a slow reader. I didn't start reading when other people started reading. So the alarm bells kind of went off, and they put me in like a summer school program where like you got to learn how to read, and that somehow kicked me into gear. But I'd always exhibited strange signs that nobody could quite understand. Like I didn't seem like a stupid person, but I couldn't spell and still can't spell. And it wasn't till I was in my 20s that a doctor, a psychiatrist that I went and saw said, "Have you ever been tested for dyslexia?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "I think you need to be tested for being dyslexic." And I did, and it was like one of the greatest days of my life to find out that I was dyslexic, because it was like all these weird questions I'd had all my life sort of had been worked out. And if you kind of read like the profile of somebody with dyslexia, it almost describes me to a T. And I'm sure, as you know, like a lot of dyslexics tend to be on the creative side and not unintelligent, but like, have this one chasm of learning that they just, it's hard for them to overcome. Now, granted, I was high functioning dyslexia, so I was able to kind of squeak through school. And this is another testament to how bad Texas public schools, are.
And also that they wouldn't have noticed.
Well, I do think that there were some teachers who noticed, but they just thought that I was a bad speller. I'm just horribly bad speller. There are words that exist that I still cannot remember how to spell, even though I've looked them up probably hundreds of times. I just cannot remember how to spell. So sometimes, you know, it's worse whenever I'm sleepy, I've noticed. And sometimes when I send emails late at night, somebody will respond to them the next day, and I'll look back on my email. I'm like, how in the fuck did you even understand what I was saying to you? Like, it can get really spooky sometimes.
Aside from whatever records you heard at your dad's house, did your sisters have any kind of musical influence on you? Were they turning you on to anything good?
Yeah, big time. My sister Angelique, she discovered punk rock and turned me on to it. So everything, I kind of owe everything to that. Just kind of hearing what she was listening to through, in her room. She was into all kinds of music though, but like when she kind of got into punk, she got into Riot Grrrl and started a band in the early 90s. This is when Riot Grrrl was brand new, and it was a real movement and really exciting. And she started a band and just turned me on to tons of great stuff. And it essentially, there were music instruments around the house because my dad was playing, so I just started messing around, and it was always about like, let me get a guitar so I can write songs. It was never about let me get a guitar so I can learn how to play, Wild Thing or something like that.
When did you get a guitar?
I didn't own a guitar of my own until 14, but I could get around them a little bit before that. But there was always stuff around: drums, basses, guitars, keyboards.
When did you start feeling like playing music was central to who you are, rather than just like an activity?
I know this sounds sort of strange, but it seemed like it was that even before I started playing.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to explain that. It was just sort of like, well, that's what I'm going to do. I just need to figure out the rest. So I finally got a guitar. And then I formed a band 1 week later, so barely could really work my way around it. But, I was like, well, we'll start a band and we'll figure it out. And the guy who I remember I found to play bass didn't know how to play bass. He just owned a bass. So he didn't know what he was doing at all. I slightly knew what I was doing, a little bit more than him. And my sister played drums with us. I kind of forgot that we did that.
What was the band called?
That band didn't have a name, but the first band I ever had with a name was called Curb Job, and that was probably around 14, 15. And it was like really low grade, sort of Sonic Youth, really noisy. I was really interested in chaotic noise rock at a young age. I loved it right away.
So you were like going and special ordering Glenn Branca albums or something?
No, I wasn't that cool.
Okay.
That came maybe around 16, which is still pretty cool for 16.
Pretty good. Have you ever heard the John Worster and Tom Sharpling skit where John Worster plays this guy that's like ultra advanced in musical taste?
No, but I think I've heard that character.
Yeah, he's like so advanced. He saw the Beatles when it was his first show, and then he got into like minimalist composers by the time he was a teenager. And then when they were making that show, his favorite band was Nickelback. Like that was like the big reveal, or something like that. It was something.
I have heard this.
Yeah,
I have heard this. Yeah, God, what a bunch of geniuses. Surely you've interviewed John, right?
Yeah, long ago, but maybe we should bring him back.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay, so you were kind of this is the point where you were kind of starting to develop your own taste, distinct from that of your parents or your sister, even maybe. You were kind of getting into chaotic noise music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was immediately turned on to a lot of the Chicago stuff. Like probably around 15, 16, I got turned on to the touch and go stuff. Jesus Lizard, whatnot. Jesus Lizard was a new band at that point. And I just loved that stuff. And got, there was a kid who moved to Texas from Chicago, and he played me the Big Black record, Atomizer, mm-hmm. and loved that record. and that just kind of set me off. I got, shortly got into a lot of the AMREP stuff and really, just wanted to make incredibly irritating, fucked up music immediately. And there was something in me that made me, I knew right away that I would never want to make music or could never be expected to make music that a lot of people would like. I had that realization really young, which is good. And that liberated me from ever like harboring notions of being like a quote rock star.
Right.
But that immediately dovetailed all around the same time into recording. I started recording when my band started recording at around 15, and around that time I realized, well, that's what I want to do. I want to record people. So then I started recording my friends around 16, 17.
Did you have a 4-track?
Yeah, I had a 4-track, and there was a man named Sam McCall who had an 8-track. And he was in this great band that was on Alternative Tentacles called Brutal Juice. And I loved that band, and he was like a big brother to me. And he essentially taught me everything that I needed to know how to record bands at first. And then, so I was recording people on my 4-track, and then I met this guy named Jeff Bridges, not the famous actor, who ran this studio and he let me record bands at his studio. And then that all kind of led to college. When I went to college, I literally, like, the first week there, I stumbled into the recording studio at the college and met the guy who ran the recording department there, and just started talking to him about gear. And he's like, "How do you know all this stuff?" This is, of course, before the digital revolution. This is still where everything's on tape. And he's like, "How do you know all this?" I was like, "Oh, I've been recording for a while." And through that conversation, I ended up getting a job at the college recording studio. And my only job really there was to make sure nobody stole anything and to record the recitals. But other than that, I had access to the studio, so I started recording people there.
Did recording feel as creatively fulfilling and visceral as playing guitar in a band?
Absolutely. It scratched an entirely different itch, but it still scratched an itch. I've always loved helping people. I know that sounds pretentious, but I do.
Why does it
really
sound pretentious?
I don't know. I mean, like, it's not like, oh, come to me, I've got the answers. I don't feel like I have answers, but I love helping people find the answers.
Right.
I always have. And I love collaboration. I love working with people I respect. I really still get off on it. I get high off of it.
And at some point, you went to Chicago, and you spoke about Big Black earlier. You went to Chicago and worked with Steve Albini as an intern?
Yeah, well, just for a short while. Like, I was there when he was building Studio A, and really the important thing about that experience was Steve was just so incredibly nice to me. And yes, I was around there for a little while, but really the big thing that I got out of that was Steve really gave me the confidence to really pursue it. And like he made it feel like not like a magic trick at all. And coming from a guy whose records, when I heard those records, his recordings, I was just like, how can anything sound this good? You know, it seemed really mysterious. I think now people totally can't understand that, because now you can just get on YouTube and see how things are done, or you can watch like online classes mixed with the masters, or hell, even, Steve will talk about how he records things. It's all just sort of an open book. Back then we just didn't have those things. And the only way that you could learn about anything was actually getting to stand in the same room with one of these people. So it was just a really special thing that he seemed to he made me feel like it was something I really could do for a living.
Do you feel like you benefited from the old paradigm wherein you had to go seek out those experiences?
The short answer, yes, but long answer, I don't think it really matters that much. I think that a good analog I can make, and I'm sure that you can resonate with this, is it used to be so hard to find the records you wanted to find, right? So you would either spend months going to different record stores and looking for those records, or you would special order those records and sometimes wait upwards of 3 months or 4 months before that record would ever show up. And it was kind of like you just threw your money into the ether and hoped that it would, pay dividends. And a lot of times you'd go to the record store and just you'd go off a sheer recommendation of somebody else, and sometimes it would work out, sometimes it didn't. But it was very potent when it did work out, right? So I think that's kind of an analog to the experiences that you're talking about. That being said, I don't know if it makes for it being more valuable because we assign the value that we want to things.
Correct.
And you don't always know the value of things until 20 years later when you look back on it. I think that the one thing that's different now is everything just moves so much faster. So when a new idea comes out about how to make music or how to record music or anything like that, it doesn't gestate like it used to. There's no scenes of music anymore. It used to be, like for example, I'm being tangential here, but the Seattle music scene that was such a huge explosion in the 90s, that was gestating for 10 years before anybody heard those bands. Now those things don't happen. A band comes out and then immediately everyone can hear them all over the world. So scenes don't gestate. There used to be like a petri dish kind of thing.
Right.
And so you would hear...
It's also like sounds are almost open source. Like...
That's
Once
right.
something comes out, then anybody knows how to replicate it. It's easier to replicate. Whereas, even if we go decades before the Seattle scene, you can hear a marked difference between a soul record from Philly and a Stax record, for example.
That's right.
And
that's a much more romantic analog than I came up with. But that I really think that's interesting. And like there would be these things where everyone would be influenced by these recordings, but no idea how they were doing them. So
they would fail into something unique.
Exactly. And we do miss that now, I think, because a lot of the sounds that people are coming up with are sheerly based on technology mutating so quickly, like plugins and soft synths and things like that. So a lot of things do sound the same. Because we're all getting turned on to it at the same time.
Yeah, and then I guess on the flip side, it's easier than ever for somebody with a unique vision to express it. And,
exactly.
And put it out into the world.
Exactly.
I feel like, at the time we were growing up, at least in my situation, I felt like in the punk rock music world, there was kind of an aversion to seeking a career making art. It seemed almost like at odds with the underlying philosophy of the scene. Was there a time when you felt comfortable, at least to yourself, acknowledging that you're pursuing making music as a career?
That's a good question. I don't know if I can give a great answer to that. I'm thinking about it. Are you talking about recording or are you talking about playing?
Just in general. I mean, it seems like, the template that you set up for yourself is that you could make crazy noise music that you had already acknowledged that not a lot of people were going to like. And then you could also, have this side path as a producer or an engineer.
Right. I guess I found a loophole, huh?
I don't know.
Scene.
I mean, how did the way that someone like, for example, Steve, how did the way that he approached his career rub off on you, if at all?
I really loved how he just respected the people he worked with. I still to this day really think about that a lot, just really respecting the people you're working with and trusting their vision. But to kind of dial back a little bit and answer your question, I mean, I think I genuinely just loved recording, and I think that I probably thought that, probably what will happen here is I'll record shitty punk rock bands on the weekend, and on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, I'll have a job doing something in audio, but it probably won't be too interesting. It'll just be something, because I just loved sound and I loved engineering and I loved the science behind it. So I felt like there was dignity in that, and that's what maybe how my life would play out. Then when it turned out that I maybe could do a little bit more than that, I was like, okay, then my goals kind of shifted. But you got to remember, I was still in a heavy touring band well into my 30s, as I was always touring and playing, and as my career was as a recording person was just sort of blossoming. So I just sort of improvised, I suppose, it just kind of changed, and I changed my goals with it.
If you meet somebody at a party and they ask you what you do, what do you say?
Oh, man, I try to run.
I know. It's a weird question.
Well, the thing is, I live in LA, so everybody loves to talk about what they're doing here, so I usually can avoid that question. Well,
what if you're in Dallas and you go to a party and someone asks you that?
All right. What I have started to do is just say, "Oh, I work in music," because telling them what I do, like, "Oh, I'm a producer, I'm a recording engineer, I'm a writer," it leads to too many questions that I am gonna want to fly into the sun if I have to answer. So I usually just try to give a broad stroke, kind of like, "Oh, I work in music." And because then the next question always is something along the lines of like, "Oh, have you done anything I've heard?"
Right, I know.
It's like, I don't know what you've heard.
Yeah, how am I supposed to know what you heard? That's I mean, when people ask, if I tell somebody that I write music for film and TV, that's what they always ask. And
yeah.
What's the reason that you feel icky about answering that question?
I mean, for me, I don't know about you, but I think a lot of people have this. But for me, it's because I have the imposter syndrome. I'm in my 40s, and I still can't believe that I'm able to make a living doing this. It feels like a scam. It feels like a grift, right? So I think somewhere deep down in me, I'm like, I'm not really a musician. I'm not really. I still have that.
Yeah. So that if you're in a dialogue with that part of you that thinks that you're an imposter, like, what does that part of you think a real musician is that you aren't?
Anyone I work with, I feel like everyone I deal with and everyone I talk to and everyone I work with is more talented than me.
Fair enough. I mean, I think they probably feel the same way because I've talked to lots of them.
Yeah, there's some good beauty in that, don't you think?
Yeah. But when I first met you in the 90s, I think you had already worked with people like Erykah Badu and The Roots, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I got some good breaks really early on. Like a lot of that stuff, like there was a lot of kind of well-known R&B hip hop stuff that I worked on in my early 20s. Granted, I was just a engineer. I wasn't producing this stuff or anything, but I was getting a lot of really amazing breaks and opportunities. So yeah, you're not mistaken. I was sort of in that. I was like, things were kind of happening for me already at that point. And
was it just like a steady trajectory up, or were there some dips?
There were definitely dips. I mean, a lot of the experiences I had early on that were really positive were mainly because I was working as a staff engineer at the biggest studio in like the Southeast or Southwest. And it's like a 5-room facility called The Lab. And, just a lot of big artists would come to work there, either because they were on tour or something like that. So that helped me get a lot of those breaks. And then whenever I went freelance, it got very hard.
What factored into the decision to go freelance?
Got fired. I mean, well, not fired, but essentially laid off. They this was kind of the beginning of like the old dinosaur studios not really being able to adapt. I remember this studio started teaching classes to supplement the income. And they gave me basically a choice of I could teach some classes or I could quit, and I quit.
Why didn't you want to teach classes?
Well, again, the imposter syndrome.
You didn't feel qualified to teach classes?
I felt like the person who was making the school happen had very bad motives behind it, and it was very cynical, and I didn't want to be a part of that.
When you're
and I didn't want to teach. I just did not want to teach. It sounded like a nightmare.
When you're producing an album, how does that imposter syndrome show up? And then is there like I'm assuming that you've become more confident over the years, but what's your inner dialogue like with yourself when you're working?
That's a good question. The imposter syndrome is a good thing to a certain degree, to where I always sort of tell myself, or I always feel like I don't have any answers. And it's okay for me to not have answers, but I have instincts. And I do really believe in my instincts because I'm not interested in making something that's pandering or cynical. There's that word again, sorry. I'm really interested in making something that's important and powerful and really does something to people. And so I know that if it's moving me in that way and it's scratching those itches, that must mean something. And also an accumulation of 20 to almost 25 years of doing this, that like my instincts have kind of proven themselves to be correct. Like whenever I have been able to follow my instincts, I've noticed that the records have turned out pretty good, and people seem to like those records. Whereas the ones where maybe I wasn't able to follow my instincts or couldn't follow my instincts, or my instincts were ignored, I've noticed those records not always are the ones that seem as successful. So I'm not trying to say that I have answers. I'm just saying that I feel like I have instincts. And when something doesn't feel right or false, I try to flag that and we address it. Yeah.
Have you learned over the years how to put yourself in an environment where you're more likely to be able to follow your instincts? I mean, as far as
definitely.
Who you're working with and who you're working for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm always thinking about that, and more, like what I like to do is just talk as much as I possibly can to the artist before we ever start doing anything creative, and not start slow, but definitely have some really frank conversations about what they want, what they think I could do, and if they really, really want a collaborator, because a lot of people don't need it, don't want it, and are ornery about the fact that they are in a position where they feel like they should, or people are telling them they should. I don't need to work. Okay. So, there will always be something I can do. So I just try to be really upfront with them that like, if I'm there making a record with you, it's there because I'm there because I really want to be there. And it isn't a paycheck for me. So I just really try to, what's the term? Vet the project as much as possible now.
Have you learned from bad experiences where you've said yes to things that you shouldn't have said yes to?
Fuck yes, absolutely. I mean, the thing is I've learned way more from my bad experiences than my good experiences. The thing is whenever it's firing on all cylinders and the artist is writing great songs and is open to collaboration and trusting you, and I'm trusting the artist, and we got this great energy going, and there's good musicians who are all playing at top form, and everybody is just trusting everyone. That's not work. That's the best. That doesn't feel like work to me at all. Like I don't know what that is other than just joy. It's the records where there's not a lot of trust and there's endless delegation, or for example, if you have like a pesky A&R or manager person who's constantly messing with the record, that's work to me, right? So I've kind of just learned to find out what those red flags are early on. I still can't always catch them, and still sometimes things go pear-shaped a little bit in the studio, and I try to right the ship. Normally I can, but yeah, the question was, sorry, I got off on my own thoughts.
I guess we're just generally talking about learning how to trust your instincts, not only like in the creative process, but choosing the right collaborators.
Right.
But another thing that you just mentioned is writing the ships. So, I've experienced this too, where, I sign on to something and it seems promising, and then I get halfway through and either, there's too many people involved and, they don't have a unified vision for what they're trying to do, and I'm getting caught in the middle. Or, one thing that I've noticed, especially with people that don't have too much experience, is sometimes people mask, insecurities and inexperience with, trying to micromanage what other people on the project are doing. So I'm interested to know, in situations like that, how do you right the ship?
Yeah, it's tough. I find being direct really works best more than anything else. I usually like to, as tactfully as possibly, say what I feel like is happening and what I feel like we could do to make it not happen. And I'm also really, really honest with people when I feel like I'm being underutilized, or if I don't feel like I'm being allowed to help them do something. I've never had an experience in a record that ended badly, like as in like where we were just like, fuck you. It's never happened. I've had records that kind of fell apart for multiple reasons, but I've always tried to be straight up with people, like, hey, this isn't working. Maybe we need to try something different.
Have you ever had to walk away from a project?
Yeah, a few times for sure. And there's a few different ways to do that. One way to do it is to make yourself unavailable. Like if it's a project that's going on too long or something, and you're not, you feel like you can't add anything more to it. You just kind of like, oh, I'm busy. And then there's just the ones where you just kind of have an honest conversation where I'm like, I think that somebody else would be better for this. And the last thing I ever want to do is be a burden on people, especially at already a stressful time. And I'm always going to ultimately, at the end of the day, acquiesce to what the artist wants to do. But that's the ultimate, like, that's how I'm going to trust you that ultimately what you say will go. Are you willing to trust me and trust other people to help you get to that point where you can make that decision of what's right or wrong? That's tough to know. And not everybody always knows before they go into a situation.
Do you think trust is something that you can garner in somebody, or is it just a matter of having the right chemistry?
It's both. I think it's a little bit of both. I think you can do a lot. This is just my piece of advice to other people that do creative things. I think you can do a lot, which is getting to know each other before you get into the studio, or just hang out, just have some coffee meetings, just talk about music, talk about what they like. And usually when I first meet somebody, I don't talk about how I feel about their music or with their demos or what. I don't talk about how I feel about it at all. I just let them talk and I ask them questions. And then maybe, then if they're interested to hear what I think about what they're doing or their trajectory or what would be interesting to do next, then we can talk. But I'm really slow to letting people know what's on my mind, because I mean, this is a job, and it is about what they want to do. And if I don't let them talk unfiltered, how will I know what they want to do?
Right. I always say with what I do, which is writing music for films and TV shows, most of what I do isn't even making music. It's listening to people and trying to understand the world through their eyes.
Yeah, talking to people who know nothing about music a lot of times too, right?
Right. And then finding a balance between, getting them to that place, but doing it in a way that's consistent with like my values and making sure that we're a good fit to begin with. That's why I ask.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I mean, for me, and I know that it's slightly different for you, but there are all different ways that I feel really nourished in making a record. As long as I'm useful, I feel pretty good. And there are records where like I had a lot of impact on, where I look back on it, I'm like, wow, I really am proud of that. But there are records where I don't feel like I didn't have a heavy hand on when you listen to it, but I feel really just as equally proud because I didn't fuck it up, and I didn't assert myself in ways that were unhelpful. Because look, artists are sensitive people too, and a lot of times they want people to feel invested and involved, and a lot of times they will acquiesce to things that they maybe aren't into. Because somebody is just being bossy or assertive, or they have like a little bit of a silver tongue, like, oh, you got to do this because of this, and like, screw that, man. That would make me feel so icky if that was happening. So there's all different levels of feeling satisfied that I get. Yeah. I kind of interrupted you. Sorry.
Well, but earlier you mentioned that sometimes it's problematic if you feel like you're being underutilized. Like, how do you want to be utilized?
I want, when I say something, for it to be acknowledged. I guess. There was a record I did last year with an artist. It was a record that I actually didn't finish because it was such a bad fit. She's a great artist and a really, really wonderful person, but it was just a bad fit, and she just did not want to collaborate. And I saw it as we got deeper into the record, because once we started bringing in musicians, we were bringing in like the first call best musicians in LA. Like just like when I really would want to impress somebody, I would bring in some of these people, right? And she did the same thing to them as well, right? And I had to finally, as much as I wanted to make it work and as much as I liked her music, I had to realize that where she was in her journey as an artist was to not be a collaborator. She needed to be solipsistic and selfish. And that's fine, but I have a finite amount of time on this planet. So I'd rather use that time helping somebody else, rather than sitting around, coming in every day and kind of frankly feeling cruddy. I would leave feeling like, wow, am I any good at this? Because I would say something, I would make a point, and it would, just be completely ignored. And she was doing that to everyone. So this is just a story of a person that I like as a human, and I like their music a lot, but we had no business working together, and it was just because of where she was at in her journey. Maybe 2 records from now, she'll be exactly where she needs to be to work with somebody.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting realization to have, that there isn't such thing as an objectively great producer or collaborator or artist. I mean, it's really all about the timing and the fit with the other person.
Absolutely.
And, maybe I wonder if earlier in your career you would have seen that as a challenge and just seen it through to the end and made it and learned something from it. But, by the time this person came around, you had been there before and knew that it wasn't the right fit.
Oh, man, that's so great that you said that. Let's talk about that. Because, when I was younger, I would, hell or high water, I would make things work. At my own, mental exhaustion, at my own spiritual destruction, I would make it work because I could not bear the idea of saying I couldn't do it. Now I got no problem saying, this is not where I need to be right now. A lot of that has to do with just getting older and not wanting to spend your time in miserable situations. And I do pass on projects all the time because I feel like this won't be much fun. It just won't. Maybe the music will be good. The artist seems like a really cool person, et cetera, but it just won't be very fun for me,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a sign of maturity and artistic maturity, that is, to realize that, you don't have to make everything work. There's enough projects out there that will naturally work that you can just pursue those.
Exactly.
That voice that says, "Oh, I have to make this work," that's the same. That's coming from the same kind of, insecurity or sensitivity that you're recognizing in artists, right? It's everybody wants to, be of use, and you want to make it work, and you want to connect, and then also it's compounding that. I don't know if this was going on with you, but earlier in my career, I just felt so fortunate to have that opportunity to begin with, when plenty of my friends were playing in bands and making no money, and that I had come from being a waiter to being able to do this, that I was just like, I will fucking jump in front of a car for any of these people. Right. I don't care.
Right.
But then,
well, that's okay. I mean, if they're worthy of it.
Yeah. I mean, so that's the big thing. And it's also just like, well, don't you want to be with people that would also jump in front of a car for you? And and also why would jump in front of a car? Why not just make a record? You know what I mean? It's like,
exactly. There you go.
It doesn't have to hurt. I mean, it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to hurt. It's going to hurt enough, naturally, to be vulnerable and to go to that place. It doesn't have to. You don't have to, be masochistic beyond that in order for it
there
to be
you go.
valid.
It's so good that you said that. There's another thing that I deal with a lot, especially with the kinds of artists I work with, which are pretty, arty farty people. Like, there's people that take their art very seriously. This isn't just pop music or something. And there's this weird cancer that exists in album making of this needs to be torture and for it to be good. And I have a major issue with that. We have these weird myths that we tell ourselves,
yes.
like the Hollises, talk and things like that. Like, oh, you have to be a real son of a bitch to make art. You have to tear yourself to pieces. And I've got news for you. That's not true.
I think you're so right. I mean, one thing that comes to mind through the course of doing this show is, somebody that I consider to be a true genius, Brian Blade. He's one of the great drummers in the world, and he's a joyful, wonderful person. And I think, when I was presenting his episode, I framed it as there's this myth of the tortured genius. And sure, some geniuses are tortured, but there's also plenty of geniuses that are joyful, and you can choose.
That's
you
right.
can choose what
it is. It is a choice. And
again, it's even if you're mining dark shit in your soul, or you've gone through terrible things, you still, it doesn't have to be any more torture than it already is to go to that place.
Yeah. It ain't easy. I mean, if it was easy, everyone would do it, right? So. We're going into the foregone conclusion that making a record is already sort of a pride-swallowing siege, right? So let's be nice to ourselves and give ourselves permission to be silly sometimes, and to laugh, and to keep the energy correct, and permission to fuck up, and permission to not treat everything sacred. Because it isn't. It's just music, right? That's why they call it plain music.
Well, maybe better you than me. You're much weaker. You're more clumsy when I forfeit my patience to you. So maybe you've had too much wine. Piggies flushed up, winkles swell up as my lady works the room.
Yeah, so one of my big missions is to try to tear down that sort of weird mythos that we tell ourselves. It just doesn't have to be that way. I know so many people that suffer from that.
Yeah. But there's actually plenty of people out there that don't.
Mm-hmm. Usually the session musicians, people who've committed their lives to this just as much as the artist, and they're just as talented, but for whatever reason, they've ended up on the other side of it where they're just playing somebody else's music, And
I think that's easier in a certain regard because you're not, you don't have to be the arbiter of whether or not it's working,
That's right.
It's less,
that's right.
It's less, for some people, it's less vulnerable.
I agree. And I get what my point that I was getting to with that is what can we learn from those session musicians who happen to be on the other side of it? They obviously don't have to stand behind it. And I think that if you could sort of slightly retrofit that to when you're the artist of like, it's not really your fault if people don't get something or don't understand what you're doing. It's all the more reason just to follow your id and your instinct and do what just comes totally natural, because even when you don't do that, there'll be squillions of people who don't get it and don't like it. So you might as well just go for it.
And ultimately, that's really the only thing that you're uniquely qualified to offer is your self.
That's right. That's the only thing that you could do is that will be actually original, is to give yourself 100% and express open your shirt up and let the bullets hit you,
right. And the imposter syndrome is there to scare us away from those bullets hitting us, right? Because if we just don't do anything, or if we kind of acquiesce to what other people are asking us to do, then it kind of protects us from that type of vulnerability.
Yeah, most things that we do every day are defense mechanisms from being hurt or embarrassed.
Take me through your process of making a record.
Well, every record is really different, and I like it that way. I make every record, a little bit different. But obviously, if you're recording with like a band, like a proper band, there is some sort of like X, Y, and Z sort of format that you would go through a lot of times. Like if it's a band, you kind of just get everyone together and you start playing. But if it's an artist, like a solo artist, like sometimes it just starts with me and that person going over the songs, talking about the songs. Sometimes we demo the songs, not always, but sometimes. And sometimes we build the songs up that way, or sometimes we put together a team of people and then we record it like a band. Every record is a little different. Also depends on if I'm writing the record or if we're writing in the studio. And then there's records that I do that I only get involved whenever I mix, So everything is a little bit different, but philosophically, there are a few like thread lines that I always like to do, and one of them is I like to work as fast as possible, because I feel like time to a certain point just only robs you of the things that were special about the moments that you captured.
You're talking about kind of trusting your instincts. I feel like the more time you spend on things, the further away you can get from those instincts.
100%. Yeah. You got to trust the moment that you captured something. Yeah. So, I mean, that's one big thread line. Another thing that I guess I consistently like to do is sets me apart a little bit differently is I don't like super duper long days. A lot of people like to spend pretty long days in the studio, whereas I like to keep it to about like 10 to 7, 10 to 8 every day, because I feel like having an outside life and getting time away from listening to the music is almost as important as listening to the music.
Yeah, that's the time when your mind is processing it.
100%. And like, I mean, if you're spending 12 to 14 hours a day in the studio and sleeping for a few hours and then coming right back in, what are you being inspired by other than the studio? So it's like you're starting to kind of get to a point where you're like mainlining your own art. Does that make sense? You're like, it's like a weird feedback.
You're eating all the time and not digesting, and then you're just becoming bloated.
Right. You're like, it's like a feedback loop of creativity that I don't see it paying a lot of dividends. Plus, rest is just important. If you wreck yourself and you're tired the next day, well, you're just going to be even more tired the third day and the fourth day, and it's exponential.
Did you develop those guidelines over time, or have you always kind of operated that way?
No, it's fairly recent. Like in the last, I would say probably in the last 8 years, I've really started to kind of narrow it down to shorter days. I mean, part of it had to do with the fact that like, oh, holy cow, if I'm going to do this, really do this for the rest of my life, I've got to get some balance. Because doing this as much as I do it, because I work almost every day of my life, you're going to quickly ruin your life. You're going to destroy your relationships. You're going to not be a very cool person. So,
which ties into what you were saying before, as far as like, you don't need to do this to the detriment of everything else. Like you don't have to be miserable.
Why? Yeah, why? I mean,
in fact, you can do a better job if you don't.
Exactly. And also another thing that I don't know if I've ever talked about this before, it's also a kind of bullshit macho nonsense to do that to yourselves, to like grind it like that. What are you trying to prove exactly? I mean, I understand if you have a deadline or something, but like what are you trying to prove? And I noticed because I've worked with a lot of really brilliant female artists, and that's one of the things I learned from working with more females is the days were so much more human and nutritious. And I started to realize that like, this is some macho male bullshit that, you know, like, oh, fuck my body. Who cares if I'm not eating? Who cares? It's like some real male bullshit that I really started to clue into. And yeah, it's kind of a recent thing that I started to think back on. I was like, when did this shift happen? And I realized it was like, there were a few women that came into my life, you know, 12, 11, 10 years ago who were like, oh, I'm going home. We're done for today. I'm like, what? And I was like, holy shit, we're so much more productive.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, of the records that you've made, I've spent the most time listening to some of the, you know, the people to which you're referring, the female artists.
Right. Well, I mean, look, it's ridiculous to like qualify an artist as a female, of course, but I will say that I have learned a lot more from them than I have from the dudes.
Yeah, I think it's if I had to venture a guess, I would say, and this is based on my own experience of doing that shit, it's hiding from something. You're hiding from some sort of emotion, or you're hiding from an insecurity.
Of course.
And you know, you're trying to prove yourself to yourself. And
of course.
You know, the idea that if you outwork everybody, then you're more entitled to do this or something like that.
Oh yeah, totally. And like this is that at the end of the day, that is some male bullshit. You know, I'm not this is the great thing about the conversations that we're having about what it is to be a man now, which is all so great.
I'm in a conference in Ian Mackay and see what his interpretation is.
Okay, all right. But you know, when I say like, you think about all the ridiculous things, like a man doesn't do that. There are certain things a man can't dress a certain way, can't talk about this, can't feel this way. I mean, obviously,
but we're even just talking about, you know, we're talking about people that have already given themselves to pursue some, in many cases, an alternative, you know, artistic lifestyle, but yet it's still, you know, this type of attitude manifests in what you're talking about. Like, hey
man, some of the most macho shit I've ever seen in my life was in the punk rock world, as I'm sure that you can agree with. I mean, some real jockey shit goes on with bands, you know, in the studio. Not as much as it used to, but like, you know, and like that's something that I had to actually confront with myself. It's like, oh, I'm kind of being a stupid dude here when I act that way, you know. Like, I got to take care of myself. I gotta listen to my body and listen to my emotions. You know, I've got to relax. I've got to spend time with people I care about. Because it's the right thing to do for me, even.
So earlier you mentioned that you were touring up through your early 30s, and then you also kind of just said that you instituted these rules when you realized this is what you really wanted to do with your life. So did those kind of coming off the road kind of coincide with your choice to spend more time producing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, look, I mean, I was already producing at a pretty heavy clip well before I kind of slowed down on the touring. I mean, I have toured just not much in the last few years. But yeah, so there was definitely like, as the touring kind of seemed like something I was going to do less of, I was like, oh wow, so I'm really going to be doing this a lot, like all the time now. So that sort of, there was a trifecta of things, essentially. There was that, there was getting older, and there was also just experiences with other artists, some of which were female, that were, I just learned how to be more of a human in the studio.
Do you miss going on tour?
Not really. What I do miss about being on tour is the singularity of the responsibility of like, all I've got to do is get to the club and be on stage at this time. I miss that, but man, there's so much downtime. There's so much killing time that I don't miss.
Yeah, people don't realize that most of the time is spent in a vehicle of some sort.
You're not seeing the world, that's for sure.
I mean, maybe in aggregate, you get to see the world and meet friends over, decades of doing it. But the other thing that's hard is, you would think that if you're in a van or a bus 10 hours a day, that you could then use that time productively. But I feel like people have a very hard time doing that. It's difficult to then, engage in another creative thing when you're going.
I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody who's able to do it effectively. Yeah. I really have. I've never. And look, I know a lot of people who make music, and everyone kind of has the same story to varying degrees. Either they say I can't write on the road at all, or I have a really hard time writing on the road.
How are you feeling about your life right now, aside from the pandemic?
That's a nice question. I feel good. I always feel a little too comfortable about everything. I always feel like I need to challenge myself more.
Is that some macho bullshit?
No. Because I feel really engaged whenever I'm challenged. Not challenged in a bad way. Challenged in like wow, this is something I didn't know I could do, and now I can do it.
Right. So what is that now?
But I'm trying to figure that out. I think a lot of it. I'm writing so much more now. That's a new experience. Not a terribly new experience, but writing with other people I wouldn't normally write with. That's a little bit of a new challenge, but it's not exactly what I'm talking about. I think it's more like on the macro scale as opposed to the macro, where it's just finding new artists that reveal something in me. And as I've said before, I say this all the time, that like making art for me is a process of figuring out who I am. And I think I just want to figure out more about who I am. I think that's the pursuit.
Has there ever been a time when you've tried to make art, or you've been working and it just doesn't feel right? Like you're not connected to the joy of it or the satisfaction of it?
Yeah, usually it has something to do with being depressed.
Like clinically depressed, or like situationally depressed?
Clinically. I mean, I'm a bit of a depressive personality. It's something I struggle with, and making art has been something that I do to stave that off, and also to distract myself from it, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I relate to that.
I think a lot of artists do.
I think for me, I had to admit it to myself that bass feeling was somewhat beyond my control. And so it's not my fault if I'm not feeling it some days.
Well, here's something that I've said before in other interviews, so I'm sorry to repeat myself, but I do think it's like something I discovered about myself that I tell a lot of people, and it seems to resonate with them, is the reason why I like to make art, the reason why I like to make records or make music or whatever, or create things, is because it's the only time I feel like I'm not time traveling. And when I say time traveling, I mean, if I'm anxious, I'm living in the future. And if I'm depressed, I'm living in the past.
Right.
But something happens whenever I sit down and start making something where those things go away and I'm present. I'm just in that moment. And all that matters is the beauty of creating. Now, a lot of people say that's what meditation is. So maybe it's just a form of meditation. But that's what it gives me.
Yeah, I mean, you can get there. Some people can get there through meditation. I mean, aside from music, I can get there if I'm exercising really intensely.
Sure.
Which also helps. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Like, that's interesting. You know, so anxiety is traveling to the future and worrying about what could
worrying
possibly
about something that
go wrong.
Yeah, that doesn't exist.
Or having, in my case, like I have debates with people in my mind. You know.
Oh yeah.
And then
have you ever thought that the debating, when you're debating that person in your mind, is actually your way of your brain telling you that you want a closer relationship with that person?
In some cases, maybe. That's an interesting thing to say.
Do you have debates in your mind with your parents? Like, I don't know if they're alive.
Yeah,
Actually,
I
think
think my dad is dead, but
that's right.
But I think even still, you can still have debates with your parents if they're dead.
That's right.
I mean, that's
right.
That's what adulthood is, like
that's
reconciling, right. You know, what you came from, and you know what you're made out of, and then how to, you know, take a step in your own direction. I feel like that's
right.
That's what life is all about, is like acknowledging where you came from, and that it doesn't have, you know, that you have agency.
That's right.
But that it also did impact who you are, and you have to accept it, and that you can choose, you know, which direction to go with with the tools that you've been given, you know, and
That's
then
right.
maybe develop some tools of your own. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think usually in my case, I have a tendency to want to be right. So I will have like a hypothetical debate with somebody, just so that, you know, in case something goes wrong, I know what I'm going to say. and again, that's like, if you drill deeper into it, I mean, that's also based, you know, on what we were talking about before, of that, you know, the artist being vulnerable, and, you know, it's a way of like trying to protect myself from vulnerability, basically, you know, because it doesn't matter if I'm right, you know, in the end.
No, it truly doesn't.
It's just like, what matters is, you know, as far as it concerns me, like, what am I hoping to accomplish it, and how can we get there, you know?
Yeah.
You know, but so, and I think one of the biggest realizations I've had is, you know, is that, you know, I don't need to convince anybody to do anything, and I don't need to convince anybody that I'm right, and that if I appeal to people, you know, with an argument based in logic, you know, and they don't go for it, it doesn't matter, you know. I mean, there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, and you can't reason somebody out of something they didn't reason themselves into, which is a lot of the times how I feel when I get so frustrated, you know. Right,
and also like lots of that stuff, even in my own case, you know, lots of things that I'm trying to present as through logic or reason, you know, it's got an emotional basis at the foundation.
Always.
And so I'm just fooling myself.
Yeah, we're all fooling ourselves.
But to that end, like, if you're working with somebody, I mean, I would imagine that part of the job is trying to help them, you know, at least, you know, get out of certain situations or get into other situations, and to trust themselves. And you're trying to affect the outcome to a certain extent, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So how do you do that without being imposing?
Well, I mean, I can be imposing, you know, that I think I'm allowed to. And like different artists want different levels of imposing. Some artists really want you to boss them around. Some, they just want that, you know? It's not in my nature, so I kind of I have to figure that out pretty quickly, hopefully, that's what they want. Some people just want to be told what to do. What? Am I singing now, or am I playing that? Okay, cool, I'm doing that. Like they just want that. They want the situation in the studio to be, a situation where they don't have to make a bunch of decisions.
Right.
And they basically said, okay, John's the guy for this. I trust that he'll make the decisions that lead me to a place where I'm happy with this, and I'll just raise the flag whenever I don't like something. Those situations are great. Then there's other situations where you have to be more like tactful or more sensitive. This is part of the challenge. This is part of the thing that keeps me doing it, is like knowing that every day when I show up to the studio, there are some significant amount of nuts and bolts that are always pretty similar, but there's always something that happens every day that surprises me. Sometimes not a big surprise, but I'm constantly wondering how much, I'm constantly amazed at how much more I feel like I need to know and learn and grow,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty incredible. The fact that you and I are able to work in a thing that still offers any mystery to it is fabulous.
Lots of that is an attitude too, because you could approach it with a different attitude where it's like, well, it's all physics and it's all been done before, and
sure.
Then that would be causal, and that it would be what you see.
That's right.
So it's a matter of embracing that possibility to begin with.
And those are and what you just said, can fall prey to that. I can fall like, oh God, it's just it's the same 12 notes, whatever. But that's usually depression talking.
When did you start kind of being aware of the depression and that it was driving the ship sometimes?
Oh boy, pretty early on. I would say early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
But I was having, it all kind of started with panic attacks for me. And, it was essentially like, what's happening to me? Am I dying? Like that sort of thing. And, eventually started going to therapy and I still go to the same therapist. I like now, and I live in LA, I FaceTime my therapist, cause he's so good and knows me so well. I always keep a real close eye on that little, devil depression. It's always there, just kind of hanging out, looking for a foothold.
If you let it in, the negative voice can always win. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because it's
very convincing.
Well, because here's the thing, all right? A lot of the things that depression tells you, it's true. What we're doing here at the end of the day doesn't amount to a hill of beans. 100 years from now, nobody's going to know our name. There's no immortality project. Everything is a distraction from death. These things are intrinsically actually true, but it doesn't change the fact that you have to get up every morning and go to a job or be a productive human. None of this shit changes. The existential dread that we experience, it's real, and there's a real reason behind it.
Yeah, to keep us alive.
It doesn't change anything.
No.
You still have to get up and go to your job or find somebody to love or whatever.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, especially, this has come up a lot lately. Existential dread is on everybody's mind, or maybe I steer the conversation that way. But unlike the last four episodes of the show, that's where it all ends up. But, well, there's a very clear existential, external existential dread that people can look at right now. But it's always there in one form or another, and the world is, people are talking about how everything is so uncertain now. It's actually not more uncertain than it ever has been. It's just more obviously uncertain. And anyway,
I completely agree
with the existential dread thing. I think that's been something I've contended with my whole life. It's something that I've been aware of early on as an atheist kid, without easy answers to turn to.
That's right.
But then after being in the room with people that are close to me as they're dying, and it took death off of a pedestal in a way. It made me thankful for it. It made me thankful for, and it also made me thankful for the finite nature of life, and it's given me more confidence to just jump in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. I mean, I relate to a lot of what you just said, of taking death off of a pedestal. Like, one of the things that does happen when somebody close to you dies is you're forever changed after that happens. You truly are a different person, and it does crystallize things in a way that you're forever changed. There's no rerun, man. We're here. This is it, and the finite amount of time that you have should frame everything in the fact that, like, my God, if we just had forever, I wouldn't even get out of bed. If we had forever, I wouldn't, what would be the actual motivation to anything? This is total sophomoric philosophy, by the way, but it's still true. Yeah.
And it's also, it's true. And also you just said it's total sophomoric philosophy just to make sure everybody out there knows that, so that you can be impervious to criticism.
Yeah, that's right. Fuck you guys. You can't touch me. I'm over here with my leather-bound copy of Camus. Come at me.
Have you ever thought that, like, a whole universe could exist within one atom?
Hey, man, how do I know the color blue is the same to you as it is to me?
Yeah. Well, how do I know that the experience of death is the same to you as it is to me? But anyway, that it is the underlying thing. You're right. It's, what depression is telling you is true. And it's probably just, what depression is it's probably just rooted in, the same part of our lizard brain that's just trying to keep us alive. It's trying to prevent us from taking risks and,
Of course. I mean, look, there's a lot of evidence out there that can provide a theory that we are over-evolved, right? We've become so self-aware of ourselves, and we've, like, attached meaning to everything, right? So it's possible you could argue that we're just a weird mutation, and our awareness has just become too big. Now we're just too aware of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And, like, what a weird situation it is to wander this planet knowing that it's all going to end. What a weird predicament. I mean, if you really think about it, because if you look at, if you ever had a dog or cat that's died, they don't seem terribly bothered by dying, right? But we spend so much effort trying to ignore it and trying to push it away. It's such a strange predicament we find ourselves in.
Man, I think that's a good place to end it.
Everything ends.
That's what it's all about. John, thanks so much for being on the show.
Of course. My pleasure.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.